Simon Calvert from the group Be Reasonable, a campaign group against smacking being banned. Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon.
Well, I didn't know about the existence of Be Reasonable. Why do you feel so strongly about the physical chastisement of children?
Well, to be clear, we're not an organisation that exists to advocate that parents should smack. We're here to advocate that politicians shouldn't criminalise parents who do.
I've got you.
And I think, and the polling suggests very strongly that most people would agree with that. Whether or not people endorse smacking themselves, most people do not want to see parents who take that view criminalised for it. But as a matter of fact, something like 2/3 of people do think it's sometimes necessary to smack a naughty child. And let's be very clear what we're talking about here. The law protects reasonable chastisement. So by definition, any chastisement that's unreasonable is unlawful.
But reasonable, of course, that's a judgment that's highly subjective and could be open to a vast range of interpretation.
Well, it must be pretty clear to people, because here's the interesting fact. The reasonable chastisement defence, at least in England and Wales, is hardly ever used.
Well, this
in court.
Because I found this is one of... So I've looked at the smacking issue for nearly 20 years now. This is my 19th year of looking at it. And I must admit, I've never been aware of Professor Lazzolari and these scientific studies, these factual evaluations. But one of the things that always bothered me, and it's when we introduced the ban on smoking in cars when children are on board. Now, since the ban has been introduced, I've only seen one child in a car where the parents were smoking, but nobody did anything to stop them, even though it was against the law. And it made me realise I believe there's been no prosecution so far for parents driving or anybody smoking in a car when a child is on board. What's the point of introducing laws that no one can actually prosecute? I mean, if you smack your child in the home, how is anyone ever going to know? And there's that fear, I suppose, that if we criminalise smacking, we all sit back and think the law will take over. The law can look after children.
Well, I mean, I'm making a different point, which is that the reason why the reasonable chastisement defence is hardly ever relied upon in court is because parents and police and prosecutors understand the difference between, on the one hand, the kind of ordinary parenting which most of us experienced, where a parent might tap the child on the back of the hand or on the back of the legs after explaining, what they've done wrong, and then reassure them that they love them. That's clearly reasonable. But then, on the other hand, you have behaviour which is unreasonable, which is abusive. And the fact that the defence is not relied on in courts, as I say, suggests that everybody understands there's clear blue water between the two things. And so to be very clear, if Jersey presses ahead with this law change, they actually have to introduce the law yet, then what will they be outlawing? Well, they won't be outlawing abuse, because that's already illegal. So they'll be outlawing perfectly reasonable, mild behaviour of the kind, as I say, that most of us experienced. And do we really think that our childhoods would have been better if some of our parents had been occasionally prosecuted for smacking us? I don't think so. It's highly disruptive to a family.
Simon, presumably you're very worried about the prospect of a load of court cases revolving around the definition of reasonable punishment. And this new term that I haven't heard before, backup smacking,
what's that?
Which apparently can improve a child's cooperation. Can you explain to us what backup smacking is?
I'm not sure I can. I'll hazard a guess, but let me just first pick up on your previous point, court cases. I'm not worried about court cases because the court cases, the few court cases that there have been where the reasonable chastisement defence has been tested, had very reasonable and acceptable outcomes which everybody would endorse. So a parent who has clearly gone over the top, that is unreasonable. That parent can be convicted. And by the way, the test certainly in the law in England and Wales is that anything more than a temporary reddening of the skin is not reasonable. So I say again, if we change that law, we are criminalising the mildest possible parenting behaviours.
If I can come out, I mean, that in all the years that I've looked at it, the one killer line from the anti-smacking lobby, which I've always found actually impossible to respond to, and I'd be interested to hear your go at it, Simon, is you're not allowed by law to punch adults or smack adults or physically come to grips with adults. In fact, I believe just touching an adult will qualify as assault or could qualify as assault. So if we don't do it to adults, why would we do it to defenceless children?
Exactly. So you've put your finger on it, because touching another adult would be a criminal offence. potentially, it does
could
pass the strict threshold of what is an assault if it's against their wishes. But parents need to do all kinds of things for their children that they wouldn't do for another adult. I mean, delicacy prohibits me from going too far, but parents have to help their children with their toileting, and they have to they can confine them to their rooms. You wouldn't do that to another adult. They can confiscate their mobile phones. You certainly wouldn't do that to another adult. So the problem with these anti-smacking campaigners is they get carried away with their own overheated rhetoric, and they forget that the relationship between a parent and their own child is unique. It's special, and it comes with special responsibilities, and therefore must also come with special rights. And if you start interfering with that by criminalising ordinary parenting choices, like the choice to use a mild smack on the back of the hand, you are invading family life, and you are putting parents at risk of prosecution. In Wales, we asked FOI, Freedom of Information Act requests, to some of the Welsh NHS authorities to find out what they would do. If Wales passed a smacking ban, we asked them what they would do if a member of staff in the NHS was accused of having smacked their child. And they said, we would deal with it like we would deal with any other allegation of child abuse. And that's your problem. You're taking something which is not child abuse and you're calling it child abuse, and it has two very damaging effects. One is it criminalises and it stigmatises ordinary, decent parents. And number two, and this is very important, it distracts the police and the social workers, the very people who should be trying to identify children who are at risk, who are being abused. Some, perhaps a lot, of their time is going to be wasted on perfectly good families where there's nothing wrong. All that's happened is that mum's tapped Johnny on the back of the hand.
Simon, another kind of grey area, it seems to me, will be who reports these cases. Now, when I was a kid, if I had the chance to get
long time ago, back
in the 19th century, if I had the chance to get my mum and dad in trouble for a laugh, I'd have been straight down the nick.
What you saw calling in? I've just been beaten by my dad.
Yeah, to get your dad in trouble for a laugh. I mean, don't you think that opens up a whole cornucopia of potential problems?
Well, certainly there are some kids who will make allegations against their parents in order to just for sheer spite. Children can get very angry with their parents. The kid who's screaming "I hate you" into the pillow
exactly.
after so that is indeed a possibility. Now, that child would very quickly come to regret that if he watches mum or dad being interviewed by the police, being prosecuted, perhaps losing their job. I mean, if the parent is a teacher or works with children and they're prosecuted under this new law, well, they're effectively, as I say, being prosecuted for child abuse. They're going to lose their jobs. The consequences could be very severe.
I still remember having a bit of a heated discussion with a family campaigner who didn't believe it's a well-reported court case of the woman who hit her son, I think, twice on the arm with a hairbrush, and the child was taken into care. And you have to think in balance that no matter what harm a parent might do, even losing control and going beyond reasonable chastisement with two physical strikes, compared to being put into care. I mean, that seemed a far worse punishment to me, to the child. Can I ask something? Do you have children yourself?
I do.
And
but
ever smack them?
They're grown.
Did you ever smack them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Age 2 or 3, it was an occasional thing, and we would explain to the children the sort of behaviour that might get them into that kind of trouble. We would explain to them why they were going to be smacked. It will be, as I say, a tap on the back of the hand or something. And then afterwards, of course, you reassure them that you love them. Now, that's the kind of thing that thousands and thousands and thousands of ordinary parents do. But, smacking gets talked about by campaigners, by politicians, and dare I say it, even by journalists, in ways which are a million miles away from that. Yeah. And it undermines people's confidence in their own parenting decisions. And it dangerously encourages politicians to start legislating left, right and centre. And we don't want that.
Can you just wrap up by actually taking us right back to the beginning? And you alluded to, I think you said that most people are opposed to smacking bans. Do you actually have the data, what the percentages are?
I haven't got it in front of me, but yes, there is a poll which the Be Reasonable campaign carried out. We asked comrades, rather, to carry out. Yeah. And yes, the proportions were something like 2/3 of people think it's sometimes necessary to smack a naughty child, and something more than that, actually, thought that you should should not criminalise parents who smack. So again, that shows that there are people who don't agree with smacking, but they don't think that parents who take another view should be criminalised. And that seems to me a very reasonable position.
You deliver a very divisive message, because not everyone is going to agree with you. You deliver it very well, Simon Calvert, from the group Be Reasonable.